And welcome to our webinar from Pathways to Positive Futures. I'm just going to review a little bit about using GoToWebinar before we get started. So if you would just move any cell phones and other electronic devices away from your computer, sometimes those can cause feedback. And then we also recommend, depending on your internet connection, that you close all other applications such as your email or your Pandora or any other music that you might have. And then check your settings on the audio pane if you're experiencing any problems. During the presentation, you're going to be in listen-only mode. You can send questions to the webinar organizers. These are mostly going to be held until the end, where we'll have a time for some Q&A. However, also during Q&A, if you want to ask a question with your voice instead of typing, you can raise your hand, and you'll see that function being turned on during our Q&A session then. And finally, if you are calling in over the phone, remember to unmute yourself if you are going to be asking a question. So today, next slide please, our webinar is a tool of hope, the Building Bridges tip sheet. And we will now present you with Martin Rafferty from Youth Move Oregon. Thank you, Martin.
All right, can I have the next slide, please? Can I have the next, or no, this slide. All right, so hi everyone. I just want to go over the objectives today. Today we're going to learn the process of creation of this tip sheet. For some of you who have no idea what the tip sheet is, you're going to have to wait in anticipation for a few moments. And we're also going to examine if this tip sheet really had a lot of input by family and youth. So we're going to examine if we followed that same kind of practices as we are preaching with the tip sheet. So did we practice what we preached? We're going to learn all about the tip sheets, specifically the youth tip sheets. We're going to give you at the very end, we're going to give you a link so you can go and get the youth tip sheet. There are two versions. There is a brief version and there's an expanded version. There's also a family tip sheet, and it's the same. There's a brief and expanded. We're going to see how these documents have inspired and shaped programs across New York City first, and then Oregon. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about the tip sheets. We're going to let you guys ask some questions. We left some time because we know that that's really important. Next slide, please. So I'm going to introduce Brian Lebrowski. Brian is the Youth Committee Chair for the Building Bridges Initiative Committee, and he's a very passionate, very intelligent, and very respected youth advocate. He sits on the board of CAFID as well. He has his fingers in a lot of different advocacy programs, and he works really, really hard on advocating for young people who are in the mental health care system, but more specifically in residential programs. Next slide, please. Brian.
Oh. Sorry, Martin.
It's okay, I forgive you.
I'd also like to introduce Martin Rafferty, who is the director of Youth Move Oregon, who is also a very passionate advocate for young people who are in both in community-based and out-of-home programs, and has done a lot to develop the youth movement in the state of Oregon. And I'm sure Martin can share with you a little bit more about himself and the work that he's done when he talks about some of the things that have been done to implement the Building Bridges tip sheet in the state of Oregon.
Next slide. So Brian is going to introduce the Building Bridges Initiative, which is the program that kind of launched this tip sheet.
Sure. So the Building Bridges Initiative is a collaboration between residential providers and community-based providers, as well as government officials, families, other stakeholders, to ensure that transitions between residential programs in the community, as well as from program to program, as well as from youth, are done well. That services are family-driven, youth-guided, strength-based, culturally and linguistically competent, individualized, evidence-informed, and consistent with the research on sustained positive outcomes. Now, when the
Hey, Brian, sorry, I'm going to ask you to speak up a little bit and get closer to the microphone. You're coming in a little bit in and out, and we're getting some requests from people to just speak a little bit louder and more clearly. Thank you.
Sure. Sorry about that. So, again, let me go back to the Building Bridges mission, is to identify and promote practice and policy initiatives that will create strong and closely coordinated partnerships and collaborations between families, youth, community, and residentially based treatment and service providers, advocates, policymakers, to ensure that comprehensive services and supports are family-driven, youth-guided, strength-based, culturally and linguistically competent, individualized, evidence and practice-informed, and consistent with the research on sustained positive outcomes. Again, some of the core principles of the Building Bridges initiative is the concept of family-driven youth-guided care, cultural linguistic competence, clinical excellence and quality standards, accessibility and community involvement, and transition planning between services, both, again, between services and between youth and adulthood. For those of you who are familiar with the system of care principles, I mean, really, Building Bridges is taking everything that's been learned with wraparound and system of care and applying it to both residential services as well as the interface between residential services and community-based services. So a little bit about the creation of the youth tip sheet. Initially, prior to the creation of the youth tip sheet, there was a development of the family tip sheet, which was designed as a way to help families identify what the right questions were to ask of residential providers so that their youth could get, the youth that they care for could get the best care possible by those residential providers. In the development of the family tip sheet, a question was raised, why not develop something similar for youth so that youth could have those same questions in their hands to ask those residential providers themselves. So a group of youth advocates and youth actually currently in residential programs were assembled from across the country. We held a series of conference calls that where we interfaced with a professional author who took a lot of these notes down. A lot of the conversation was around like what questions would we as young people, when we had the opportunity to, when we were at the point when we were going to be in a residential program, what questions would we have wanted to ask those providers? And a list of questions were developed. It went to the writer. The writer came up with a draft, brought that draft back to this group of youth and youth advocates, and eventually, kind of kept going back and forth, and eventually a final draft was created. And eventually, when the actually, one thing that happened before that is that we, much like the family version of the tip sheet, we decided that we really needed a long version and a short version of the youth tip sheet. A long version for those youth who were looking for kind of an explanation for each of the questions, and then something that was a lot easier to digest in that, like one page, something that they could almost put in their pocket that would just have a list of the questions. So, so that was the process for developing the youth tip sheet. I'm going to hand it over to Martin again, who's going to talk about the actual content of the youth tip sheet.
And can we go back to the last slide for a moment? Thank you. So just to add, and a question that we got from Building Bridges when we were putting this on is where's the family piece? And Brian and I are youth advocates, and we really, I work under Oregon Family Support Network, and we're really, we believe in the family movement as well, but we're not the experts in that movement. We're youth advocates, and so I wanted to just go over specifically just a few lessons learned around doing this process. We used Google Documents, which is a way to have people collaborate in real time to edit these documents. We did lots of reminder phone calls for youth to be on calls. We built relationships with the young people who are working on these documents in order to have them be successful in this project. It wasn't something that they were necessarily they magically appeared out of nowhere. We really helped them along using technology to remind them and help them edit. All right, next slide, please. So here, these next slides are actually going to be the youth tip sheet, the brief version. And these sheets, I know it's a little blurry, and that's because we kind of blew them up a little bit. But we're going to go through the entire brief version of the tip sheet. And before we do that, I just kind of want to explain the theory behind this. The theory is that a youth advocate could meet with a young person before going into a residential program and go over the sheet with them. The idea is that the information, the questions on the sheet, gives the young person the right mindset, teaching them to ask the right kind of questions, not just to the institution or to the clinic or to the doctor that they're seeing, but asking the same questions to themselves so that they can kind of be aware of what they're, what they're gearing up to do and what they should seek from their treatment. So this is just the kind of introduction. It talks about some of the concerns that young people who made this sheet felt when they were going into the same kind of experience. Reminds them that they're not alone, that it's a big change, and it's a little comforting. And again, we really hope that another youth advocate can be there with the young person to help them go through this. But in an unperfect world, this sheet can act alone. Can we go to the next slide? So here are a list of questions that we go through, and these questions seem, when I first read them, they seem kind of common sense, but for young people who, historically in the system have not been given a lot of respect, maybe their parents have been asked to talk about, their needs or to look out for the concerns of the young people. These questions seem kind of new and exciting to the young people that, how's this program going to help me? Giving them information about what kind of factors determine how long they're going to stay there. So it gives the game plan to the young people and helps them kind of understand what it's going to take to help them succeed in the program. This also creates a relationship of understanding that, if we can have this open dialogue, we can kind of communicate about what's going on. And in the future, coming back to these goals, that relationship can build. I love the last question, how can my emotional and physical needs be met so I feel safe and comfortable? I think this question might put some of these organizations on edge a little bit, but it's certainly a framing question. It's a framing question to get this relationship between the young person and the service on the right page. And for programs that are doing a really poor job at this, when they see these questions, it might prompt them, to know that, hey, this young person's connected to an organization that is backing this document, and maybe we need to start looking at these factors a little bit more. Next slide, please. So this is a continuation of the other questions to be asked. And again, I joke with one of our youth coordinators here in Youth Move Oregon that I hate when people go through the PowerPoint and read verbatim down the list. But a few of my favorite questions on this slide is what therapies and medications will I receive, and what are they for? What choices do I have about my therapies and medications? That question, again, helps so much with the framing. It helps so much with the relationship between the young person and the institution, if you will. And it's an exciting and empowering question. Another question that I really like on this page is, does this program use seclusion, isolation, or restraint? If so, what is it? What is done to prevent their use? So it's the question puts it back into the young person's court and says, all right, how can I avoid being restrained? And again, it helps with framing. The young person can understand what are the limits, what are the lines. And people might believe that it's something that is gone over, these questions with young people when they enter these programs. But we have found that nationally they're not. With PSU, we did a Bill of Rights, a mental health youth Bill of Rights, and this last question, what if I find a particular therapy too painful or unhelpful? Whom should I approach with my concerns? That fits in perfectly with the Bill of Rights, having a way of giving feedback to the institution. This is another question that might make some programs feel really uncomfortable. But again, it's a question that's important to be backed up by an organization like Building Bridges or whoever is implementing this program. Next slide, please. This first question on this sheet, how will this, and again, you'll notice that I skipped a few questions. I promise at the end we'll give you the tip sheets themselves and you can go and read through them. Brian might have some of his favorites, and if you want to jump in, you can, Brian. But my favorite from this one is, how will this program help me prepare to go back to school, to college, to work, or live on my own and handle my own finances? So many times when we send our young people to these programs, we don't think about the fact that we're taking them away from this very important transitioning time in their life. And so a lot of these programs, they're not prepared to help with that transition. And so that time that they're not learning how to transition into adulthood on the outside, they're not learning it on the inside. And so when they come out, it's really difficult to regain those skills. So it's really good question, and it helps the program maybe think about that a little bit more. If the program has already thought about it, it helps the young person take the best possible knowledge away from this intake. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to give it over to Brian. Brian has been implementing this tip sheet in New York City, or thinking about it for a long time. And so, Brian?
Sure. Thanks, Martin. This is a very exciting pilot project that we're going to be developing in New York City, but wanted to give you a little bit of background about how youth get referred to residential treatment, kind of residential treatment, before going into what the pilot project is about. So New York City, we have, through the Office of Mental Health, we have a number of residential treatment facilities which to get access to those residential treatment facilities, you have to be approved first through what we know as the pre-admission certification committee. So it's a process. There are also a number of residential treatment centers that both our child welfare system and our education system sometimes you go through to get into that are not necessarily part of this process. So again, this only applies to those youth who go into residential treatment facilities. In this process, there have been, when youth have been referred through the PAC committee itself, they have been sending out copies of the tip sheet along with the acceptance letter, and also been sending out the youth sheet out to the folks who are supposed to be giving them out to the youth. Now, sending out both the family tip sheet and the youth tip sheet cold, as Martin said, can be a resource in itself, but in an effort to try to beef it up, we wanted to add some additional resources to help support youth ask the right questions when they are going into a residential treatment program. So,
Brian, you're starting to fade in and out again.
Oh, sorry. Next slide. So what we're doing in New York City is called what we're calling the Youth Advocate Pilot Project, which was started out as an effort to find out if youth even wanted to be referred to a residential treatment facility, what their treatment preferences were. I happen to sit on our pre-admission certification committee, and it's a really big application, very long. Information has to be provided, psychiatric evaluation, psychological, psychosocial, but there's not necessarily anywhere in the application that says, well, what does the youth want? And so, in part, as an effort to kind of get some of that information, a form was developed locally that had a series of questions that youth could respond to. That asks questions like, what questions do I have about my treatment? What are some of the side effects of my medication? What are some options that have been tried in the past? What are options that that I might be interested in trying in the future? Now, as an initial step, just to kind of get the form out, that was one level. But to ensure that young people had kind of the support that they needed to both fill out that form, we have decided to use some of our resources to train and hire a series of youth advocates specific to being part of this PAC process. So again, we decided that we wanted to support the development of a group of advocates who would go out and meet with youth to help them both fill out the form, but also go over the youth tip sheet. Next slide. So we've developed, in the process of developing training specific to the levels of care locally that, so that the youth advocates know about the different options that are available to young people, both the in-home, community-based residential, and the campus-based residential options, both residential treatment facility and residential treatment center. And the advocates that we're looking to train and hire for this are all advocates who have experience already in the field, who've either been trained as advocates before or who have a year or two of work experience as a peer youth advocate. We're looking to have 5 to 10 peer youth advocates go through the entire training. And when the pilot is done, we're looking to provide advocacy for approximately 50 youth who are referred to the PAC committee from our children's psychiatric centers over a 6-month period. So we're starting the pilot very small with kind of very targeted area. We have intermediate level children's psychiatric care here in New York City, where the length of stay are, typically between 6 and 12 months, and then youth are referred from that care to, quite often to an RTF level of care. And so we really wanted to focus our attention on that group of youth as kind of the starting point of the pilot. Next slide. So the process for implementing this will be the peer youth advocate will meet with an identified youth at the Children's Psychiatric Center for about an hour, going over the form with them, going over the tip sheet, figuring out like what questions from the tip sheet they really want to have answered. Then that application, well, not the application form, but the kind of the feedback form would go to the pre-admission certification committee with the youth's permission, where that would become part of the application to the residential treatment facility. The peer youth advocate will also receive weekly supervision from the PAC coordinator to kind of process out any of the challenges that they're feeling, so that the advocate has support in doing this. The peer youth advocate will also attend any kind of family team conferences, child family teams, family networks for the youth as they might come up. If the youth desires to have the advocate present as they're being referred to this level of care, a significant number of the youth who are referred from the Children's Psychiatric Center level of care to a residential treatment facility level of care are involved in our child welfare system, and our child welfare system also has a network of youth advocates currently which work with youth who attend family team conferences. And then finally, the peer youth advocate will accompany the youth at their placement interview if the youth desires to have the advocate present. So again, just kind of to help the youth throughout the entire process so that they feel supported and they can have their voice heard from the point that the referral happens, the point that the interview happens, so that the care that they're receiving is more coordinated, more that they don't necessarily feel lost, like they've been receiving one treatment at one place, and then they're receiving another treatment at another place, and that there's not necessarily, it's to strengthen the handoff, so to speak. Next slide. So we had before we've actually done the trainings and been able to go through the whole process of bringing up again, training the youth advocates, going through the entire process. We did have a situation recently, it was actually last week, where one of the youth advocates who's probably going to be going through the training had an opportunity to meet with a youth at the hospital, and had the opportunity to go over both the form and the tip sheet. And it was interesting. A lot of the questions that the youth, being able to see the interaction, the youth definitely felt a lot more supported. She realized that there were a number of questions that she had for her treatment team that I don't know if she realized she needed to ask. A lot around education and wanting to be sure that her credits transferred. That was a big issue to her. So kind of like it was an actualization of one of the big things that those of us who were on the calls a year ago when we were developing the tip sheets kind of said, hey, what questions would we have wanted to ask when we were in that position? And to see this young person being able to ask those questions was very exciting. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Martin, who's going to talk about what's going on in Oregon regarding the implementation of the youth tip sheet there.
All right, next slide, please. So we, here in Oregon, we are at the beginning of the rollout of the youth tip sheets. The first thing that we did was we tried, I saw a question earlier asking, oh, can this be used for youth coming back into the family? And that kind of mindset is the same mindset that I had. This tool was such a bright kind of document in my mind. It helped young people ask the right questions, not just the questions that they needed to know about going into a residential program, but the questions that they needed to know in order to succeed in any kind of mental health treatment that they were receiving. So when we rolled out this document, the first thing that I did was I took it to our youth groups here in Oregon, and we went over the tip sheet, we talked about it, and we tried to implement it in people's treatment from day to day. We're going to do it again this summer. We're going to have special. We're going to have a special weekend conference where young people are going to come from across the state, and we're going to look at we're going to look at the same questions, not in the same format, but we're really going to use this tool to help young people kind of ask the right questions about their treatment. Next slide, please. So other ways that we're implementing this in Oregon is that we're working on a white paper, not a white paper, an issue brief to be adopted by our Department of Human Services in Oregon has a mental health and addictions division, and so we've presented this document to them, and they are very interested in it. There are a few people who want to take a closer look at it, and so it's currently in the process of becoming a document that is adopted by the state in that way. So we'll keep people posted on that, but we really feel like that's going to happen really soon. We do training with peer support specialists, youth peer support specialists in Oregon, and we use this document to help train them, to help young people, again, frame their treatment. So when we train our youth peer support specialists, this document is something that we train them with. Again, not just for inside residential programs. It has been utilized by Bob Lieberman's Three Bridges program, and that program is a YAT, stands for Young Adult in Transition, and that it is a secure residential treatment facility, so they do use that document in that program. So it is being used in that program in Oregon, and we, will continue to work with other residential programs to get this document implemented. Again, it's better if we can have a youth advocate running through this document, so we don't necessarily want to just hand these over to residential programs. But this secure residential treatment program has a peer-delivered support, youth peer support specialist trained by us. So Youth Move Oregon actually is training them, and so we help them understand the document, and they help the young people go through that document when they're doing their intake. Next slide, please. So we're also going to be holding a monthly conference call. We're hosting that call, Youth Move Oregon is, and Brian's going to be on that call, and it's actually anyone who's really interested in using this document, you can join us on this call. We're going to share our lessons learned. We're going to work on figuring out how we can use this tip sheet in a broad sense, but also with programs themselves. So I'm excited about that. This conference call is a committee under the Building Bridges Initiative. And we also are using these sheets. We had a new project that launched last year for Oregon, and we have 3 wraparound sites. And so we're doing training with those sites, and we're going to be using this tip sheet in the wraparound model, in a high fidelity model. Next slide, please. All right, so we are at the point for questions. Again, we wanted to leave as much time as possible for questions. Thank you for everyone for listening in. On the next slide, let's just go to the next slide. You'll see right there the URL for the tip sheets. This website has the youth family tip sheets and the family tip sheets. So it has 4 different versions. Two of them are youth specific. One is an expanded of what you just saw, and one is the actual document that we saw in this presentation. The other 2 are for family members, and again, there's a brief one and there's an expanded one. So you can go and get those there. They're absolutely free. You can print them off there. Building Bridges wants you to print them out and use them in whatever way you see fit. Our emails are there. If you want to connect with us with these conference calls that we're going to be having once a month, feel free to email us. We'll add you to the list. Brian, unless you have anything to add, open it up for questions.
Okay, well, I have one from the chat, and that is, do peer advocates come from the community, or are they identified youth that go through the residential program that have the characteristics of a peer advocate?
In Oregon, our peer advocates they've gone through the mental health care system. So they're not just like near peers. They don't just have characteristics. They actually have some experience. Brian, what about your program?
All of the advocates that we have are peers in the sense that they have received mental health services, most of whom who have been in some kind of out-of-home care. Some are typically they're not providing peer advocacy services for the same program that they were in, but many times they are providing peer advocacy services for a similar program or similar level of care that they were in. So, for example, we have a young lady who is currently in a community residence who's providing peer advocacy for our therapeutic, it's a family-based treatment level of care. And we have a number of, and some of them are in college, some of them are just out of high school. It varies.
Great, thanks. And so our next question is, I'm going to unmute Daphne Colacion, and just so you know, Alice Preble, you're going to be on deck. Daphne, are you with us? No. All right, how about Alice? Alice, are you available?
Can you hear me?
Barely. Can you speak up, please?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, my question is just about training for those peers that are working with the young people. What type of curriculum do you use in training them to do that kind of work? Is there anything specific for training that they go through to prepare them for working with other young people?
Is this for the New York or the Oregon?
Either, or both.
So for Oregon, we have a free training that we offer thanks to our state's addictions and mental health department, and so we offer a free peer support training. And yeah, we do have a curriculum that we have them go through. It's a very it's a long curriculum. It's about 8 days with 4 hours a day. So we do modify that when we're doing staff training versus like training youth who are going to be youth peer support specialists outside of a program or outside of a residential program. We will modify it for like make it a little bit shorter because those programs might not want that much specific details. So yeah, we do have a curriculum, and we would be willing to share if you wanted to shoot me an email, Alice.
Okay, great. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah.
In New York State, our statewide youth organization, Youth Power, has a 16-hour youth advocate training curriculum that we've had two classes of peer youth advocates trained in the last year, and they've just started it really they've started to do this training in the last year, and I know that they're going to be developing a train-the-trainer process for New York State, but that has not yet been implemented. And that the training for what we're doing with the pilot project, the training is being developed right now.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is more of a comment, but I was just wondering if you could speak to this, which someone wrote in that many adolescents are rejected by multiple residential providers because of extensive histories of multiple failed placements, and that many of the children in the children's psychiatric centers in New York are there because no providers believe that they can provide appropriate community-based care. So Brian or maybe Martin, I just wonder if you have any experiences working with some of those youth or recognize this issue and how your work may help.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we're calling this a pilot project, because we want to see how this intervention works. We really want to.
Brian, can you speak up into the phone again a little bit?
Sure, sorry. And by the way, I'm sorry to everyone for the whole fading in and out for the last half hour. So the project that we're doing is really trying to focus on that exact population of youth and seeing if having peer youth advocate is helpful in that young person identifying their needs in a way that maybe they have not been able to. And I appreciate that this is probably the most challenging group of youth in our system. So hopefully we have good outcomes from the pilot.
And my only comment to that is that I think that I can't speak to what's happening in New York, but when we hear similar things here in Oregon, it's true that there are some community-based programs that aren't prepared to deal with the kind of high needs that some of the young people have, and so appropriate placement is really important. But we hope that these tip sheets help, even with youth with really high needs, help kind of shape, have the young people be able to work on the highest level that they can from where they're at. So this is primarily a tip sheet for residential programs and not community programs, but there are community programs that do work with youth who can benefit a lot from these documents.
Our next question is also written in. Martin or Brian, do you think these tip sheets could be used in an acute setting or a court-ordered setting?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yes, I think even if not every single question is relevant, at least most of the questions are relevant, and so yes, I think the sheets can be utilized in those kinds of settings as well.
Martin, do you have anything to add, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I answered this with my last comment that I think that this document can be used by all I mean, there might be certain states that young people are in where they wouldn't be able to like focus, but if there is any kind of focus at all that can be had to go over these questions, I think it would be at the very least helpful. Of course, it's gonna, it depends on where the young people are at and what their mindset where that's at, but I think it always can be helpful if there's at least some calm moments to go over it.
All right, I know that these tip sheets are pretty new and everything, but do you have any plans, or have you guys thought about creating versions that are more developmentally appropriate for maybe latency age children or more developmentally delayed?
That's all you, Brian. I don't know. I don't know that answer.
We had talked about developing something that would be more developmentally appropriate for younger youth, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd say is that we always recommend that a youth advocate or a peer support specialist goes over this document with the young person, and so if the young person is developmentally lowered, not able to understand these questions, then that youth advocate or that youth peer support specialist can kind of paraphrase the language.
So the next question, I'm just going to keep reading them off since people I think are shy to raise hands. How do you address the confidentiality issue with the youth that are in treatment? And do the advocates have access to the youth going into treatment?
Brian, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So we're developing some safeguards and protocols to make sure that confidentiality gets kept. The youth, the peer youth advocate won't have any specific information about the youth. There's also going to be kind of a permission process before the youth meets with the youth advocate. So both parental consent as well as, and in the case where a youth is involved in the child welfare system, going to the planning agency to get consent from the planning agency to bring in the youth advocate, but also consent by the parent as well as consent from the youth. And then as far as the information that the youth provides, in the form there are sign-offs for both the youth advocate to share the information with the PAC committee itself, as well as if the youth identifies anybody else that they want to share the information with. So we're really trying to focus on, make sure that any information gets shared, only gets shared with the appropriate people.
Great. And so I'm going to unmute Trina Osher for her question. Trina, are you there?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Okay. First of all, I want to thank both of you, Brian and Martin, for really taking on an incredibly important project and being so thorough and responsible about it, involving so many different parties. I think you've done a fabulous job, and I'm really looking forward to learning in probably not too many months what you're finding to be the impact of this tool. But I would also like to say that we should be careful about considering this some sort of metric that we always have to use exactly as it is. I think that settings and situations, the context in which a youth and a family and a provider and the various agencies are involved might have an impact on which questions are important. I think that what's been so valuable about listening to you both is how the training of peers to work with youth to help them understand that they have a voice and learn how to use their voice is the major learning here. And the big question is, are youth feeling that they have more say, and do they in fact have a more positive impact on the decisions that are made about their care, both when they're entering care, when they're in care, and when they're leaving care? I really want to commend you for moving forward with that. We often say kids need a voice, but we don't do anything about making it possible for them to use that voice, to learn, find that voice and use it. And you've made a huge step in that direction. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I absolutely agree that there are that this isn't a catch-all, and it's also, and in certain situations it shouldn't be used exactly as the sheets are found on the site, and that's exactly why we do want youth peer advocates and youth support specialists there to go over the sheet with young people, again, because sometimes there might be things that aren't appropriate for the young people, but I absolutely agree that it's, that it should be customized, and there are culturalistic factors that come in that the sheet doesn't cover, or could kind of run over, and so I really agree with you there.
Great. And so our next question, I'm going to unmute Suzanne Gaspar. Suzanne, are you there? Suzanne?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Hello?
Thanks. Yes.
Thank you. Yep, they were speaking earlier about the training for the youth advocates, and I was just curious what kinds of topics are covered in those trainings.
We cover everything from HIPAA laws and kind of like the protocols that our state wants us to follow around peer-delivered services. We cover how to find programs and social services in whatever region the young people are coming from, since there is no perfect master resource list of every area in Oregon. We do role plays. We go into specific mental health diagnoses, and so it's really, we really cover a lot of different subjects. It's a long training. Brian, do you?
Not as comprehensive. The youth advocate training that Youth Power offers focuses on empowerment, self-help, peer support, peer advocacy, and systems advocacy, including some training around boundaries and self-disclosure, and how to facilitate groups, and how to develop an action plan, how to prepare youth for a meeting that they might go into. The training that we're going to be offering for the pilot project is also going to focus on the different levels of care that are available in New York City, as well as what the actual PAC process. So I think we have on our adult mental health side, we do have some peer support specialist trainings that are much more that are 6-8 month kind of trainings, but we don't necessarily have that super comprehensive training that's well designed for a younger audience. But that's always in development.
Great. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions here because I've got a lot of them, and we only have time for one more question, which essentially is, do you have any job descriptions available for what this youth advocate would be, and perhaps you can even speak to how this is different from the adult certified peer specialist process? if you can just sort of speak to the job descriptions. And then I just want to note to people who are asking specifically about do they have trainings available or things like that to contact either Martin or Brian individually through their contacts for that. So just speak to the job description, and that will be our last question. Thank you.
Fran, you want to?
I was hoping you would go.
Okay,
you
yeah,
were going to go first, but.
Okay, yeah, I can go first. Yeah, and we don't call it peer advocates. We call it a youth peer support specialist. And I looked at some of these questions, and so I want to specifically speak to the part about the fact is that youth who are young people, the main difference for me as far as the adult peer support curriculums that are out there and the youth peer support specialist curriculum that we have, the difference is that for young people ages 14 to 25, the system loses those young, in Oregon, the system loses those young people at a high rate, a huge dip. And a lot of them come back in at the age of 25 through the justice system or through the hospitals. But with adult peers, they are acting as a peer to the person who's seeking services and a peer to the doctors in the system that is prescribing these medications and these services. Now, a youth peer support specialist is actually not a peer to those doctors, and so in a way they act more as a bridge to these services than an adult working with an adult working with an adult. It's actually a young person working with a young person with an adult, and so it's more building bridges. It's more of a bridge than the adult peer support specialist. That's my opinion. So some people don't necessarily agree with that, but we have found that specifically training young adults is we tried doing it with just regular peer support training, and it wasn't as effective as when we customized it. And yes, we do have job descriptions. We have interview questions. Before giving those out, I would like to have a conversation because they're not something that we just want to mail you pieces of and you try and glue it together, because it's we want to make sure you have the whole process in mind. And I'm actually willing to kind of work with folks who are really interested in that. But I am willing to mail people up the curriculum for the peer-delivered services training without that conversation. So, Brian, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I think that we actually lost Brian, so I think we're ready to wrap up the webinar.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, PSU.
Great. You did an awesome job. I'm going to sign off now.
Okay.